and why we decided as trade unions to put forward constitutional proposal and the need to democratize our governance structure of Sri Lanka and the problems which existed in the constitution which we have right now. The comrades who spoke before me also addressed the issue of the executive presidency and the political demand which has come from the Gall face Aragalia. People have been asking Gota to go home, and how we have seen this as, we have interpreted this as people demanding for the abolition of executive presidency. So the constitution which the NLAC trade unions have proposed captures the need for the abolition of executive presidency, the need for a more democratized governance structure, and more importantly, what we should remember is, for the last 40 years or more, this country's economy has been held together by workers in the free trade zones, by workers in the plantation sector, by migrant workers and so on. These are the people who have brought dollars into the country. These are the people who have held together our economy. And yet, when we look at our constitution, when we look at the way our constitution has been structured, when we look at the way fundamental rights have been structured, it has by and large left out this vital section of our community in whose work and in whose effort our country has been running thus far. So apart from what the comrades who spoke before me has addressed, I also want to touch on an issue, a political and constitutional issue which we have brought into this proposal, and that is centering a constitution around workers' demands. And we have put forward various suggestions, but one of the ways in which we have done that is to expand the fundamental rights chapter of the Constitution. Now, all of you already know that in the fundamental rights chapter of the Constitution, there is a section where it says people have a fundamental right to form and join trade unions. So this is already a fundamental rights in our Constitution. And yet, if you look at the private sector, workers are constantly dismissed and thrown out of employment when they join unions. And this has by and large escaped the purview of constitutional lawyers. This has by and large escaped the purview of any kind of judicial interpretation on what it means when you have a fundamental right to form and join a trade union, and yet in the private sector, it is the norm that workers are dismissed for joining a trade union. Illegally, companies acting illegally. So what we have tried to do is look at the existing constitution, the 1978 constitution, and the directive principles of state policy. And in that it says the primary duty of the primary duty of the state is to ensure that the duty of the state is to ensure economic sustainability of the country. The duty has been put on the state to ensure economic stability. And when the state thinks or decides that it can't do that, it can almost subcontract this responsibility to the private sector. And when we look at the export sector, that is what has happened. The state has subcontracted its duty to build the economy of this country to private companies. And yet, when the state gives the responsibility to the private sector, somehow the liability is cast on the state to protect the right of workers to form and join the trade union the liability has not been shifted to the private sector. So when workers are dismissed for joining unions, we can't come to the Supreme Court and say the fundamental right of the worker has been violated. The 1978 Constitution, I believe, can be interpreted like that, but it has not been given a judicial interpretation thus far. So what we as trade unions have done, putting forward a workers' constitution, have made this issue, which is not very clear in the 1978 Constitution, very clear. We have included new concepts like business and human rights, where even the private sector, private companies should be held liable and accountable for fundamental rights violation. And we have brought private companies also to be held liable when the fundamental right of a worker is being violated. So I think that is one of the interesting aspects as a workers' constitution, which we have brought into the amendments or brought into a new constitution which we are proposing, apart from the fact that we have asked for the right to life, we have asked for the right to a decent living wage. It's not a minimum wage we are asking for a living wage, which means you can no longer give wages to workers whereby families cannot survive on those wages, or families have to struggle to feed their families through the wages they are getting from the private sector. And we have called for policies which look beyond gender, racial, ethnic, religious discrimination. So these are some of the things which we know affect workers, and we have brought that into the constitutional proposal we are bringing forward. But most importantly, we have also asked for the abolition of the executive presidency. And the reason for that, as the comrades before me had said, the reason for that is the executive presidency, which has existed like a black blot on our democracy and our governance and the way in which our country has been running, has eroded democratic structures as a whole in our state, has eroded it as a whole, whether it be the public sector, whether it be the private sector, it has eroded democracy. And it is only through the abolition of this executive presidency, which people also have been asking for, can we once again restore democracy, which is what our state, our independent state, was founded upon. So that is something which our constitution has strongly asked for. Our constitution has strongly asked for it to be worker-centric, and our constitution is asking to once again put the power back in the hands of the people, to put the power back in the hands of the workers, and to ensure that workers can continuously hold our state accountable when it passes policies and laws which are anti-labor. Thank you.